The early morning sun barely crested over the horizon when Major Diana Vega stepped onto the tarmac. Her boots struck the concrete with quiet certainty, her helmet tucked under one arm, her eyes fixed on the aircraft that had been hers for the past 3 years. Around her the base stirred with activity flight crews, checking systems, fellow pilots, nodding in silent respect as she passed. Captain Ellis jogged up beside her, tossing her a casual update about weather systems shifting over the target zone. Diana answered calmly, her tone clipped and measured. The usual pre-flight rhythm carried on until the crew around them suddenly fell silent, a ripple of unease breaking through the routine. General Marcus Harrington appeared across the flight line, flanked by 2 aides, his stare locked on her like a laser sight. He didn't stop walking until he stood inches away from her. Without greeting, he spoke with chilling finality. "You're being removed from the roster, Major." For a beat, the world around her blurred. Diana didn't flinch, didn't ask why in front of the others. She gave Captain Ellis a steady look and told him to continue pre-flight checks. Then she followed Harrington to a quieter corner of the runway. He handed her a fabricated explanation. Readiness concerns, he called it. She already knew the truth. This wasn't about readiness. This was personal. He held out his hand for her mission tablet. She gave it to him without hesitation, her fingers still for half a second too long on the device before letting go. No plea, no argument, just silent dignity. Behind them, the squadron watched from a distance, uncertain, but aware something wasn't right. No one spoke. They didn't have to. Everyone could see it. Diana Vega was being sidelined without reason, and no one dared to stop it. She turned without another word and walked back toward the operations building, past the aircraft that was no longer hers. The only sound was the dull thud of her boots and the distant whine of turbines firing up. She didn't look back, not even once. Part 1. Introducing Diana, a simple woman with a complex past. At 37, Diana Vega carried herself with a quiet strength that needed no introduction. She wasn't flashy or loud, and she never demanded attention in a room full of pilots used to competing for it. Her uniform fit just right, not because it was tailored, but because she wore it with purpose. She kept her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense twist, a style that hadn't changed in years. Her boots were always polished, though, never spotless like everything she did. Practical, dependable. Diana didn't speak unless there was something worth saying, and when she did, people listened. She had spent 5 years at Bram Air Base flying missions, analyzing terrain, recalibrating systems when others gave up. She never talked about her past, and no one pushed her to. What mattered was how she handled a crisis, how she led when others froze, how she never looked for praise when things went right. In the break room, she drank black coffee from the same stained mug every day. She remembered birthdays, lent out spare socks from her locker without asking for them back, and always knew when someone needed space. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it felt like something earned. Most of the younger officers couldn't quite place her. She didn't carry the bravado of a typical squadron leader yet. When it came time to run drills, she outperformed them all. They'd whisper guesses. Maybe she used to teach. Maybe she transferred in after burnout. No one guessed close to the truth. Command respected her even if they didn't always show it. She knew the base like the back of her hand, from the maintenance hangars to the shadowed edges of the comms towers. New tech crews came to her before their own leads when problems got complicated, and she always made time to listen. She never bragged about flight hours or citations, even though her logbook was longer than anyone else's. She logged more combat flights than half her squadron combined, yet never once mentioned it. For Diana, doing the job was enough, doing it well even more so. Some said she'd been demoted years ago. Others figured she was just one of those people who didn't chase rank. She had the bearing of someone who had once held more authority than she let on, but no one pressed her. You didn't ask Diana Vega questions you didn't want answers to. She lived alone, walked to the base every day, even though she had a clearance car, and often lingered after hours to double-check security logs or help the night shift prep equipment. It wasn't out of duty. It was just who she was. Thorough, reliable, invisible when she chose to be. Even her locker was simple. No decorations, just a photo turned slightly toward the back wall, its corners worn soft from years of avoiding it. No one ever saw her look at it for more than a second. Whatever it meant, she kept it locked away, same as everything else about her past. And yet, for all her simplicity, there was something unshakable in her presence. Pilots stood straighter when she entered the room. Even the mechanics made fewer jokes around her. She never demanded respect. She simply walked through the world like someone who had nothing left to prove. That was Diana Vega. Quiet, grounded, steady as steel. The kind of person who never needed to explain herself, the kind you'd trust with your life even if you didn't know why. Part 2. The Mission. A Battle, Bigger Than War. Subpart 2.1. Mission Readiness and Sudden Dismissal. The morning moved like clockwork. Pilots ran pre-flight checks, tech teams double-checked systems, and Diana moved through it all with her usual calm precision. She'd spent weeks building out the mission approach, running simulations, refining every detail, until it was as airtight as it could be. She and Captain Ellis were walking toward her assigned jet when the mood around them shifted. Ground crew who normally greeted her went silent, their eyes darting away. A subtle unease spread like static in the air, invisible but heavy. General Harrington appeared on the edge of the tarmac, walking directly toward her with a stiffness that didn't belong to routine. She felt it before she saw it. Something was wrong. Badly wrong. Ellis glanced at her confusion in his eyes, but Diana didn't break stride. She told him to continue his checks and walked toward the general, her steps steady even as her stomach tightened. She stopped at the regulation distance, chin high back straight. He didn't waste time. Said she was being removed from the flight list. That someone else would be taking her place. No reason that made sense. Just a final decision. Effective immediately. For a split second, something inside her recoiled. Not from shock, from recognition. She'd known this man held a grudge. She just hadn't expected him to act on it today. Not like this. She could have protested, cited protocol, argued that pulling a lead pilot just before takeoff compromised the mission. But she didn't. She looked him in the eye, took a breath, and handed over the mission tablet like she was handing off a checklist. He didn't even look pleased. Maybe he expected her to lash out, make a scene he could use against her, but she gave him nothing, only silence and obedience, cold and clean. From a distance, her squadron had seen the moment unfold. They didn't know the words, but the body language told enough. Diana walking away from the jet she helped build this mission around. Harrington standing rigid and unreadable. It didn't sit right with anyone. Ellis caught up with her outside the operations building, asked what had happened. She told him the change was official, that he'd be flying with Mercer now. Her voice was calm, flat even, but behind her eyes, something had gone still. She didn't cry, didn't pause. She just walked through the corridors she knew better than most past pilots who couldn't meet her gaze. The woman who had shaped this mission wasn't going to fly it, and no one dared question why. Inside the locker room, she started unzipping her gear, each movement sharp and precise. Her hands didn't shake, her jaw didn't clench. If anything, she looked almost peaceful, like she'd already known how this day would go, like it was just another step in a long road she'd walked before. Subpart 2.2. The photo in the locker. The locker door creaked open with a soft metallic sound that broke the silence around her. Diana knelt down, slowly pulling her gear from the shelf with the same precision she brought to everything. Her fingers moved automatically, folding her flight suit, removing name patches, packing each piece away as if on autopilot. Then she paused. Her eyes landed on the photo tucked into the back of the locker, half hidden behind an old utility pouch. She'd kept it there for years, turned slightly so she wouldn't have to face it directly. But now, with her mission stripped away and no one else in the room, she let herself look. 5 figures stood in front of a squat concrete building under a hot Afghan sun. Dust in the air. Camo uniforms. 3 faces were blacked out with marker, part of a classified operation. The 4th was Connor Harrington, smiling at the camera, young and confident, unaware of how little time he had left. The 5th was Diana herself in different insignia, different rank from a lifetime ago. The silver eagle on her chest had since been traded for a major's oak leaf, not because of failure, because of necessity. She touched the edge of the photo lightly, her thumb brushing the image of Connor. She remembered his voice, the way he always volunteered first, the way he joked even under pressure. She remembered the sound of gunfire that day, and the decision she made that cost him his life so she could finish the job. The locker room door opened quietly behind her. She didn't turn. She knew the footsteps. Colonel Weaver stood just inside the doorway, arms crossed, face lined with something between regret and resignation. He didn't ask questions. He already knew this wasn't about readiness. He knew Harrington had never forgiven her for what happened in Coast Province, though he'd never known the details. All he said was that it wasn't fair, that this decision reeked of something personal. Diana stood up, closed the locker slowly, and met his eyes. Told him not to make calls, not to escalate. Said it wasn't worth it. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just nodded. There was a brief moment of silence between them, not awkward, just heavy with shared history. Then Weaver asked why she never fought harder to clear her name. She told him the mission had been more important, that some truths needed to stay buried to protect what they built. He looked at her for a long time after that, then reminded her she still outranked half the people making decisions around here. She just gave a small smile and said, rank didn't matter when the right people weren't looking. She zipped her duffel and slung it over her shoulder, told him she'd be out of the locker room in time for his briefing. He nodded again, stepping aside. As she passed him, he didn't salute, but he didn't need to. His silence said enough. He respected her, even if no one else knew why. Part 3. The Secret Behind the Shadow. Subpart 3.1. The Briefing Room Tension. The briefing room was colder than usual, not from temperature but from the silence that stretched between officers shuffling papers and adjusting chairs. The screens displayed satellite imagery of the target zone, but it was the empty seat at the front row that kept drawing glances. Captain Ellis sat stiffly beside it, arms crossed, not bothering to hide his discomfort. The room should have been humming with final prep energy. Instead, there was this edge, a crack in the rhythm. Diana's absence didn't need to be addressed aloud. Everyone felt it. General Harrington stood at the front, his tone clipped as he reviewed mission objectives. High-value intel, tight timeline, complex encryption. His delivery was polished, but the undercurrent of strain betrayed him. He didn't look at the empty seat once. Major Carson, the intel officer, stepped up and pulled up schematics. He hesitated just a second too long before explaining the data package. His voice faltered when he described the encryption signatures guarding the facility's mainframe. Something about the code didn't line up. A woman in the back, Lieutenant Commander Walsh from Naval Intelligence, leaned forward, her brow furrowed. She quietly asked Carson if those signatures matched chess protocol. The phrase hung in the air for a beat like someone had cut the oxygen. Harrington shut it down fast. Said chess protocol wasn't relevant. Called it speculation. But he avoided eye contact with Walsh as he said it. She didn't push further, but others noticed. Whispers started near the back, passed between low-ranking comms officers who weren't sure what they were hearing. One of them mumbled that Diana used to work on black box encryption. His buddy nudged him to stay quiet. But the thought had already landed. Diana's name was suddenly back in the room, not by presence but by association. Everyone remembered she'd designed most of the current approach routes. Captain Mercer, the pilot, tapped to replace her, raised a hand. Asked if they could consider the alternate vector Diana had drafted last week. Harrington dismissed it. Said they were moving forward with the existing plan. His jaw clenched. The tension climbed another notch. It wasn't chaos. Not yet. But it was close. Officers exchanged glances they didn't want to explain, the kind that asked silent questions. What were they missing? And why did it feel like the one person who could answer wasn't there anymore? As the next speaker stepped up, the screens flickered briefly, a glitch that passed too fast to confirm. Harrington didn't acknowledge it, but Ellis did. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing like something about this entire setup just stopped making sense. He didn't say anything out loud. He didn't have to. Not yet. Subpart 3.2. Put checkmate on the roster. Twist unleashed. The door burst open just as Harrington tried to shift focus back to weather conditions. A junior officer from communications rushed in, out of breath, clutching a secure tablet. He didn't wait for permission to speak. The Secretary of Defense is on the line, sir. He wants full video connection. Right now. That stopped everything. Even the projector flickered to black like it knew something bigger was coming. Harrington hesitated, then gave the order. The screen filled with the image of the secretary seated at a long table flanked by high-ranking officials, and a seriousness that pierced the room. He didn't greet anyone, didn't soften his tone. His first words were direct. I'm overriding your decision. Put checkmate on the roster. She flies. A silence deeper than any briefing pause followed. Not confusion, not resistance, just silence. Harrington tried to respond, fumbling over protocol, claimed he didn't know anyone by that call sign. The secretary cut him off, told him checkmate was Colonel Diana Vega, told him she created the chess encryption architecture the target facility was attempting to replicate, told him this was no longer optional. Gasps weren't audible, but the air in the room changed. Officers stared at each other, replaying every quiet moment from the past 5 years. Walsh closed her eyes briefly, as if everything just snapped into place. Ellis leaned forward, hands gripping the edge of the table. Then the doors opened again, and this time, it was her. Diana Vega, in full flight gear, helmet in hand, eyes forward. She walked into the room with the calm of someone who no longer needed to explain anything. No one moved. Even the secretary paused to acknowledge her. Behind him, one of his aides stood and saluted. Others followed. And still Diana didn't speak. She just walked to the front of the room and looked directly at Harrington. "I'm prepared to resume command, sir." The words landed with quiet authority. She didn't need to raise her voice. The room already belonged to her. Harrington stepped aside without a word. She accessed the console and entered a clearance code no one else had. The map changed instantly. Additional data, hidden schematics, protocol layers only she could decode. She turned to the pilots. "The encryption isn't just similar, it is chess protocol. If they break it, we lose everything. Global comms, mission integrity, lives. You don't need to believe me. Just follow me." And they would. No hesitation. No doubt. The simple woman who had walked alone across the tarmac that morning had just stepped fully into the light, and no one would ever see her the same way again. Part 4. Redemption in Flight. Subpart 4.1 Mission Execution under Checkmate. The flight line shifted from stunned silence to sharp movement within minutes. Orders were issued, briefings adjusted, and Diana took her place without a trace of hesitation. Her presence settled over the squadron like a calm storm front, quiet but charged with purpose. She handed Ellis a revised vector path, not theoretical, not simulation-tested, something drawn from real-world failures, coded anomalies and instincts only years in the shadows could teach. He nodded, no questions asked. The rest of the pilots followed her lead, watching how she moved, how she spoke. She didn't bark commands or explain her logic. She made eye contact. She trusted them. And that was enough. The jets roared to life in staggered rhythm, Diana's aircraft taking position at the rear of the formation, then sweeping into the lead just before takeoff. From the control tower, it was clear the flight pattern was non-standard. From the mission board, it was brilliant. She flew low at first, dipping beneath the radar horizon, then angled sharply into a valley flanked by heavy rock. The route masked their approach using geological interference. It wasn't in any briefing. It wasn't supposed to be possible. Ellis watched her from wing position, adjusting flight distance every few seconds to keep pace. She relayed minimal updates, just enough to hold cohesion, just enough to let them improvise within the framework she'd already shaped. In the command center, Harrington leaned over the map, watching the route unfold like a puzzle he couldn't solve. One of the analysts whispered that the maneuver looked like a chess protocol variation, a real one, something thought to be theoretical. Walsh confirmed it. Not by citing documentation, but by recognizing how the pattern broke traditional signal logic. They were flying through an encryption blind zone, and it was working. On the second pass, Diana called a shift. She directed Mercer's team to split off along a side channel, rerouting around a heat signature that hadn't registered earlier. She read the defense layout like a story she'd written herself. The team responded in perfect sync. No lag, no errors. Even the newest pilot in the group stayed online, following her through the tightest maneuver corridor any of them had flown. They didn't just believe in her. They moved like they had trained for this moment their entire careers. Diana gave one final command as they neared the target hold formation, a wait signal. Her voice was steady, calm. Every aircraft held in place. The encryption system ahead glowed on the display, unreadable to anyone else, but not to her. She typed in a sequence manually. No computer interface, just pure code, and the system responded. It opened, just like it was meant to, just like she had built it to. The mission had officially begun, and for the first time in hours it felt like it might actually succeed. Because Diana Vega wasn't just leading it, she was shaping it in real time, and everyone up there knew it. Subpart 4.2, Success Without a Flaw. The data streamed in fast and clean. Diana confirmed full extraction within seconds, locking down the encryption before the system could trigger its defenses. There was no trace left behind, no alert, tripped, no fallback protocol engaged. She signaled the strike sequence next. The team moved with perfect precision, each aircraft hitting its target with surgical control. The explosion radius stayed within design parameters, and the facility folded into dust without sending out a single call. Command confirmed it from the control center. Walsh whispered under her breath that it was flawless. Harrington said nothing. He just watched the display hands behind his back, the last pieces of his assumption falling apart. In the air, Diana stayed calm. She issued final commands to regroup, adjust for turbulence over the return corridor, and monitor air defense sectors. Not a single pilot was injured. Not one jet took damage. They were flying home untouched. Back at base, ground crews had already lined the runway. Not by order, just instinct. People had heard. They knew something had shifted, that this wasn't just another successful mission. It was history. Her jet was the last to land. The moment the wheels touched down, the line of crews and pilots stood straighter. Nobody spoke. They didn't need to. Every eye followed her as she taxied in. She stepped down from the aircraft, removed her helmet, and looked out at the silent crowd. No speech, no nod, just presence. And in that silence, there was weight. A kind of recognition that didn't need ceremony to feel sacred. Ellis joined her on the tarmac. He didn't speak either. Just fell in step beside her like he always had, this time with something different in his posture. Respect was no longer unspoken. It was understood. They walked together toward the debriefing room. Inside, analysts would comb through the mission data, confirming what they already knew. It had worked. Every risk, every maneuver, every line of code. All of it. Outside, as the wind settled across the flight line, the base remained still. And for the first time in 5 years, Diana Vega stood fully visible, not just to her team, but to everyone who had ever wondered what made her different. Now they knew. It wasn't rank. It wasn't glory. It was the quiet, relentless drive to do the job right, no matter who was watching, no matter what it cost. That was what they saw now. That was why they stood in silence, not in awe, in gratitude. Part 5. The Past Revealed. A Father's Realization. Subpart 5.1. Harrington Reads the Truth. Harrington sat alone in his office, the room quiet except for the low hum of the ventilation. The folder on his desk had arrived moments after the mission ended, marked eyes only direct from the Secretary of Defense. He opened it with mechanical precision, expecting operational summaries. Instead, he saw a name he hadn't seen in full context before: Colonel Diana Vega, Chess Protocol, Coast Province, Operation Black Signal. As he turned the pages, something in him began to still. The reports weren't redacted. Not anymore. They laid out the entire mission from 5 years ago: the encryption tech, the hostile fire, the perimeter breach, and the death of his son, Lieutenant Connor Harrington. He read the lines twice before they made sense. Connor hadn't died because of a tactical misstep. He had died protecting Diana, shielding her while she finalized the transfer of the protocol core. It had been the only way the mission could succeed. There had been no negligence, no betrayal, just a decision. And a sacrifice. One his son had made with full awareness of the consequences. One Diana had never spoken about. Not once. She'd accepted a demotion after the mission, not because of failure, but to disappear. To bury her identity as creator of one of the most secure systems the military had ever fielded. She had carried that burden in silence, even as Harrington pushed her out, blocked her, questioned her every move. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of it all pressing down on him. The anger he'd carried for years collapsed into something hollow. He had built a narrative to explain his loss, one that made Diana the villain because it was easier than facing the truth. His hands trembled as he closed the file. He'd spent years undermining someone who had never once defended herself, who had never corrected the record, even when she had every right. The kind of loyalty that couldn't be taught. The kind his son had given his life for. He looked out the window at the flight line where Diana had just returned minutes earlier. She stood there talking to no one, her presence quiet but unmistakable. And for the first time since her arrival at the base, Harrington saw her for who she truly was. Not a subordinate, not a rival, a soldier who had chosen silence over vindication, a woman who had carried both the mission and his grief without asking for anything in return. And now all he could do was try to understand what he had never seen before. Subpart 5.2. Forgiveness without words. The office door was already open when Diana arrived. Harrington stood behind his desk, but his usual posture was gone. No stiff shoulders, no clipped tone, just a man holding the weight of something he should have seen earlier. She stepped inside without hesitation. No salute, no small talk, just presence. He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, her eyes steady on his. He didn't argue. He reached for the folder, then stopped. His voice came low, slower than she'd ever heard it. He said he'd read the file, that he knew what really happened in Coast, and that he owed her more than an apology. Diana didn't answer right away. She looked out the window instead, toward the flight line still glowing under the afternoon sun. Then she turned back to him and said, "Only what mattered. Your son was a hero. He knew what was at stake. So did I." There was a long pause between them. Harrington nodded once, and the motion seemed to settle something in the room. Not an ending, just acknowledgement, a silent acceptance of truths that had waited too long. He stepped around the desk, extended his hand. It trembled slightly, but he didn't pull it back. Diana looked at it for a second before she shook it. Firm, simple, no ceremony. In that handshake was everything neither of them could say aloud. Years of misunderstanding, a grief carried two different ways, and a respect that finally had found its place. He told her the secretary wanted her back in Washington, that her assignment here was complete. She said she needed 2 weeks. Time to finish what she started. The squadron needed proper training. They deserved more than one good day. He agreed. No questions, no resistance, just a quiet nod. As she turned to leave, he didn't call her back. He just watched her go. And for the first time, he did so with nothing but respect. The base was quiet again, the kind of quiet that followed something extraordinary. Aircraft were being checked and secured for the night, but the urgency had faded. What remained was a calm shaped by respect, the kind earned without demands or declarations. Diana walked slowly across the tarmac, the sun casting long gold shadows behind her. Every step felt grounded, not heavy, just intentional. Junior pilots nodded as she passed. Some stood a little straighter. Others simply watched. She didn't need their reactions, but she noticed them. She had been invisible for so long, blending in, doing the work without fanfare. Now, they saw her, and more importantly, they understood why she had stayed quiet. Ellis caught up beside her, falling into step like always. He asked what came next. She told him the squadron needed proper training. They flew well, but instinct alone wouldn't be enough next time. They had to know the system, inside and out. He nodded, said he'd back her however long it took. She smiled at that. Not wide, not showy. Just enough. They both knew she wasn't staying forever. But for now, 2 weeks would be enough to pass on what mattered. The orders from Washington could wait. She had given too much to walk away without preparing the next ones to lead. That had always been the plan, even if no one else had known it. Back at her quarters, she paused for a moment at the door. The squadron's voices echoed faintly across the hangars, laughter and stories already starting to reshape what this day had meant. Not a victory, a lesson, a turning point. She glanced down at the name badge on her chest. It still read, Vega. But in the fading sunlight, the letters caught the light in a way that made something else flicker. Just for a second. Checkmate. The moment passed. She stepped inside and dropped her bag, not as a sign of rest, but of readiness. There would always be another mission, another system to defend, another pilot to train. The next morning would come early, and when it did, she would be there. Leading not with rank or reputation, but with the same quiet certainty that had carried her this far. As they had once followed her in the air, they would now learn to follow her wisdom on the ground. Ellis stopped at her door as she turned. He asked again, softer this time. "What happens after you go back?" She didn't look back when she answered. "The mission continues, Captain. It always does.